From Their Eyes, a Shadow of the Colossus fic. Chapter 9. Revenging Reptile. Koromori basked in the sun from his place. It was the only enjoyment the lizard-like colossi could enjoy, since his place of dwelling was what the little people had called a coliseum. It wasn't like he couldn't leave the place, but he actually preferred the isolation. It allowed him time to think and reflect back on the mistakes that brought him here. There had been so many, and some had started long before he came into existence. Of course, all colossi have a civilization memory, and that made it easy to remember the first thing that was held against him and his kind. Back in the original land, Koromori's kind were known for their fierceness, especially when their solitude was disturbed. There had been a few times when some of the other colossi would fight them, but it was a rare few that could be an actual threat. Koromori's kind had been blessed with what some called projectile attacks. Those attacks had come about in part because most of those colossi that tried to impose on that solitude were colossi that flew. This was all stuff Koromori knew. Then came the shadow beings. Koromori had been very young when the first shadow beings had appeared, but knew the threat they were. The shadow beings would attack the living and feast on the life force in them. What was worse was that the shadow beings feasted on the dead, draining the life energy away from the land. At first the beings were considered vermin, until a leader was discovered. A little person who was actually a shadow being in a shell. Koromori's kind had realized they could help, and was part of the group that attacked the areas the shadow beings had now controlled. What was discovered was that the attacks didn't destroy the shadow beings, but resulted in adding dead beings to the numbers the shadow beings could feast on. That shame plagued Koromori as time progressed, and eventually Koromori felt shame, especially when others would remark. Even after the shadow beings had been bound to a prison along with their queen, Koromori's kind had been shunned. While his kind had preferred solitude, it was not wanted because of shame. He longed for the day that he could redeem the honor of his kind. Then they could return to the solitude they enjoyed, where it was imposed by their own choice. Koromori sighed and looked up at the sky, taking a break from his recollections. He had been spending a good deal of his time thinking back to the mistakes, and the worst ones all involved Dorman. In fact, if it wasn't for that manipulative colossi, he wouldn't have made the mistake that would have led to this exile. In all honesty, if he could have gone back in time, he would have never listened to Dorman. His memories of that day were still sharp in his mind. When Dorman had offered him the chance to redeem the honor of his kind, he jumped on the opportunity. Dorman had told him that the only way he could do that was to destroy the prison. Part of him felt the action was not going to do it, but he gave in to Dorman's suggestions. It had just been a stroke of luck that when he fired his deadly blast, something had happened to cause the blast to miss the place. After that, the battle took place, which started a war among the colossi. On occasion, some of the little people had been killed, but as things progressed, his own kind were victimized by other colossi. By the time the war ended, his kind's numbers had been decimated, and the rest had been exiled. All of that was due to his actions, and those actions were done because Dorman had fooled him. So when they arrived here, his kind shunned him, and eventually he made his way to the location that he called home. For a moment, Koromori was brought out of his recollections when a voice entered his mind. The voice was that of a kindred spirit, Malice. Like him, Malice had been fooled by Dorman, but Malice had wised up faster than Koromori had. "Koromori, Dorman has fooled another little person. He's convinced them to slay the others. I trust you will be able to stop them. If Dorman is able to reform." Koromori understood what might happen if Dorman reformed. Dorman had been determined to change things back in the homeland. Dorman had thought the shadow beings were not a menace. The exile had stopped that plan, but then the little people appeared to exist in this world, and started to arrive in the land they now called home. He had purposely isolated himself, but if he had not, he could have warned the people. At first he thought maybe Dorman had learned from his mistakes, but time had shown that Dorman still wanted control and power. He had made the little people worship him, and then he made them design their laws around him. It was what had led to the Colosseum and Koromori's task in the place. Dorman had told him that it was another shot at redemption, but he did not believe it. He went along at first, but eventually he realized that all the people sent to him in the Colosseum had one thing in common. They opposed Dorman. A fact voiced by the last man brought there, and the only one Koromori let escape. Imon. A loud whistle brought Koromori back to the present. He glanced up, and in one of the ruined walls of the arena, there was a little man. Right away he could sense the presence of Dorman. This was the little person that was being tricked by Dorman. There was only one thing to do, and he was certain the little man would not know his tricks. He decided to bring the battle to the little man. He quickly climbed up the walls, stopping only when his head was level with the hole the man had been standing in. He didn't see the little man, but they had to be hiding nearby. He opened his mouth and fired a blast of toxic stuff. While it would not hurt him, it would surely kill the little man. The threat, then, would be gone. He kept thinking that until a pain hit his one leg. He paused for a moment, puzzled, and then felt a pain in another leg. In that moment he lost his footing on the wall and fell down to the ground onto his back. It was not something he was afraid of. He could easily get off his back. It was just that such a fall needed a moment to recover from. Of course, he wasn't sure what caused him to fall, but he was certain it wasn't the little man. If that had been the case, then the sigil that bound Dorman's essence would be exposed and in danger. Suddenly, a pain went through him. It repeated, and Koromori realized his folly. The little man had moved away from the hole and had shot him off the wall. Koromori quickly rolled off his back and turned to see the little man fleeing back into the walls of the arena. He knew he could not follow the little man up there, but he had no doubt the little man would try to attack from the wall again. He turned his attention to the wall, and again the little man whistled. Koromori blasted the spot first, and then climbed up the wall. He was certain that this didn't give the little man time to escape. Again he looked for the little man, and again he saw nothing. But he did feel the sudden pain in his legs. How could the little man move so fast? He didn't have time to think about that as he fell again from the wall. He tried to get off his back, but the fall would take time to recover from. Time he knew he would not have unless the little man somehow tripped. He started to get off his back, but as before he could move, he felt the stabbing pain again, and his vision started to fade. The little man had done it. The next stab would end it. His kind would never have the redemption they deserved. He would die a failure. He should have been able to stop this foolish little man. It would be his last thought as all went black and silent. Dorman watched in silence as Koromori died. His kind had been so easy to fool, and that had been an asset to Dorman. For a moment he decided to silently mourn the death. Not only had Koromori been easy to fool, but he had been an adequate fighter. And those ones should always respect. He then watched as the little man collapsed. It was the same each time as the essence of Dorman entered into the little man. Of course, that had to happen as Dorman's essence replaced what the little people called a soul. A progress of the task continued. The man would lose more and more of it. He needed to take precautions, since the man would become more and more a puppet. He needed to make sure the little man would not start questioning his task at this point. As the shadow beings brought the man back, he peeked into the man's mind. He saw that the love the man had for the woman, that was the little man's unquestioning motivation, which Dorman had made sure of. Of course, her revival was part of his secondary plan, but Dorman was certain the little man would not see her revival. He never told the man that. A partial truth was still the truth. For the time being, Dorman secured in the memories and feelings for the girl. Those would be the last to go. He then turned his attention to the next of the colossi that needed to be eliminated. That would be Basaran, and his home was a barren waste now, thanks to all the steam geysers Dorman had set up. Those would be needed to defeat that colossi, but the human had to be able to withstand the heat there. Dorman would make the little man more resistant to the heat. Once he was done, he would wait for the little man to recover and continue the task. That way, Dorman would return to his full strength and get his vengeance.